The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. Good morning. This is the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, Hazardous Materials. Our hearing today will focus on the oversight of the Department of Transportation's Pipeline Safety Program, which is administered by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. The United States has the largest network of energy pipelines in the world, and it helps power nearly every facet of our daily activities. Pipelines count for transportation of 64% of the energy commodities consumed in the United States. To ensure that pipelines continue to be the safest and most effective, cost-effective means of transport energy products, diligent oversight of DOT's pipeline safety programs is a top priority. Here's the issue. Over the past decade, we have continued to see this committee pass out reauthorizations only to see them get stalled. 2016 Pipes Act strengthened a lot of our efforts from the 2011 Pipes Act, but as Mr. Capuano and I have continued to discuss these issues, we've seen slow implementation. The Pipes Act contained 19 mandates, 13 of which are complete. The 2011 law included 42 congressional mandates, of which 34 are complete. And today we'll hear from PHMSA on where all the Pipes Act and 2011 Act mandates stand. I look forward to hearing from industry on how it's being proactive in its own safety initiatives to ensure best practices for inspections, detecting leaks, and other important safety initiatives. In closing, I want to thank each of the witnesses here today, and I'd now like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Capuano, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. I generally don't do much of an opening statement. I'm not going to do one today, but I am going to ask the panelists. The thing I'm most interested in is what's happened to the regulations that we mandated and we set deadlines for that are now, some of them, many years past that deadline. Now, I'm not a stickler for deadlines by day. It's one thing being a month late, 6 months late, a year late. Some of these are many years late, and they're not small regulations. And for me, I would ask our panelists today to focus on that issue. What's the problem with getting some of these done, and why is it taking so long? And with that, I'm simply going to pass it back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Capuano. Today we have two panels of witnesses. I'd like to recognize Mr. Larson to introduce one of our witnesses on the second panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for letting me sit in on this. And I appreciate the indulgence. There's a hearing on armed services I need to get over to as well. But I do want to note how critical, what a critical role pipelines play in our nation's infrastructure. And I am very pleased to be able to welcome a fellow Washingtonian and a constituent from Whatcom County to the second panel, Carl Weimer, who's the Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust. Carl's been a vocal champion and leader of improving pipeline oversight and accident prevention measures for nearly 20 years. The trust was formed following the deadly 1999 Olympic pipeline explosion in my district, a day that a pipeline explosion caused the release of 237,000 gallons of gasoline into a creek that flowed through Whatcom Falls Park in Bellingham. It was ignited and claimed the lives of two 10-year-old boys and an 18-year-old young man. Since that tragedy, the trust has worked tirelessly to achieve zero pipeline incidents, promote sustainable energy production and distribution, and increase the transparency of pipeline information for local communities. So Carl does a lot of things, but he's also a Whatcom County Council member, so he's an elected official, so he gets it. He understands what we go through trying to make these decisions and to represent folks and do that in a way that's respectful. I do as well share with the subcommittee the concern about implementing the mandates, implementing the things we said we needed to implement. going back to the 2011 and 2016 pipeline bills. But I would note that going back to 2002, when I first got here, I've been working on these issues of pipeline safety. So I want to thank Carl for testifying. And if I may, just have a special thanks to PHMSA Administrator Skip Elliott as well for recently visiting Washington State's 2nd Congressional District to tour the Olympic pipeline site in Bellingham with the Pipeline Safety Trust and others. And I appreciate him being here today. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We have two panels today. The first is the Honorable Skip Elliott, Administrator of PHMSA. Our second panel will have 4 witnesses today. We will have questions for both. I ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record without objection, so ordered. Since your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. We'll begin with the first panel. Mr. Elliott, welcome to the Pipelines Hazardous Materials Subcommittee. We welcome your testimony.
Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Capuano, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the Railroads, Pipeline, and Hazardous Materials Subcommittee today. The mission of PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, is to protect people and the environment by advancing the safe transportation of energy products and other regulated commodities that are essential to our daily lives. After working for decades in the freight rail industry, a great deal of it focused on improving public safety, I believe that safety is a result of effective, smart regulations that hold operators fully accountable for their systems. But I also know that it takes more than just regulations to improve pipeline safety performance to its highest possible levels. In my 7 months leading PHMSA, I've worked hard to listen closely to all stakeholders, public, government, industry. And I believe that firsthand experience is the best way to fully understand the impact of an event, and I've traveled extensively to see how natural gas pipelines are being installed in Pennsylvania, how we train state and federal pipeline inspectors at our world-class training facility in Oklahoma, how states are working to reduce third-party pipeline excavation damage in Arizona, how operators are developing and testing the latest in pipeline inspection technology in Texas, and how, near a beautiful place called Whatcom Falls in Bellingham, Washington, a pipeline disaster forever changed that community and the people who live there. With this as background, I hope today you will all leave with a clear picture of how I seek to advance PHMSA's important safety mission. My written testimony reports on 2 categories of PHMSA activity. First, I wanted to update you on our progress in closing outstanding mandates, including rulemakings for hazardous liquid and natural gas transmission pipelines, as well as valves and rupture detection. I do understand the committee's concerns about these rules. During my confirmation hearing, I talked about the importance of setting priorities and ensuring quality and safety. In my written testimony, I provide details on PHMSA's efforts to prioritize congressional directives in a way that will allow us to finalize each rule quickly, but without impacting the quality and safety benefits of each individual rule. These rules remain at the top of my priority list, and I assure you that PHMSA is working diligently and expeditiously to complete each one. Second, are PHMSA's non-regulatory efforts, including our inspector training, grants program, and research and development. Other important non-regulatory steps include pipeline damage prevention programs and other initiatives that encourage industry-wide investments in safety management systems. Each of these areas extends PHMSA's influence beyond our own relatively small staff, which is an operational necessity if we are ever to approach the goal of 0 incidents. As we work at moving our regulatory portfolio forward, our most important focus is, and always will be, on safety. We work hard at balancing the information, data, comments, and concerns of all of our regulatory stakeholders, including industry. And while there's been significant advancement in the capability of sophisticated inline pipeline inspection tools, there is not always enough verifiable data available to fully validate the positive safety effects we require. Accordingly, PHMSA is not always able to provide the regulatory latitude some in industry are seeking as quickly as they may want. It is worth noting, however, that the pipeline industry appears to be on the verge of a safety technology renaissance. And once this technology can be fully proven, The greatest hurdle will be in keeping regulatory requirements current with the pace of new and better safety solutions that, in the not-too-distant future, has the real potential to prevent the most serious pipeline incidents from ever occurring. Safety of the systems that we regulate is very good, with a positive safety rate on both the pipeline and hazardous materials side that exceeds 99.99%. But because our goal is an incident rate of 0, very good is just a subtle way of saying not quite good enough. In that context, our prospect of success lies at the margin. 0 incidents is a maximum goal. It will never be met only by enforcing minimum standards. Even as we work hard to close congressional mandates and perfect our core regulatory functions, we must pursue success at that margin through comprehensive training and education, cutting-edge research and development, strengthening state partnerships, and encouraging industry-wide development of consistent and culture-changing safety management systems. With that, thank you again for this opportunity today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. You've been on the job a few months now. Can you describe some of the challenges that PHMSA's faced in implementing 2011 and 2016 mandates?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. As I mentioned in my comments, I certainly do share the subcommittee's frustrations on moving forward these open mandates.
I would say it's a very bipartisan frustration as well.
Yes, sir. We recognize that the 2016 Pipes Act has a number of open mandates, as does the 2011. But going back to what I mentioned, I'm fully focused on prioritizing the rules that will move most of the mandates forward as quickly as possible. We've done several things. We're moving forward the liquid pipeline rule that is in the final rule stage. That will answer a number of mandates that are open from both the 2011 and the 2016 Pipes Act, as well as some NTSB and GAO requirements. We're also expediting the safety of natural gas pipeline rule, which was oftentimes referred to as the mega rule. It actually had 14 separate sections to it. What we have done is basically parse that out into 3 sections, but the first section that will move the most quickly, it too is in the final rule stage, will address the open mandates from the 2011 and 2016 bill. And the last rule that is the one that I get a lot of questions about has to do with rupture detection and automatic valves. That one's not as far along. It's still at the notice of proposed rulemaking, but I've informed my staff that that's one that we have to move forward as quickly as possible. I think there are some other good news on the mandates. The mandate that dealt with emergency order authority is in its final rule stage, interim final rule stage, and it's over at OMB now, so that should be coming out shortly. And then there are several others that are following up. So basically what we're trying to do is move the rules that have the ability to close most of those open mandates from 2011 Pipes Act, 2016 Pipes Act, as well as addressing open NTSB and GAO requirements. We have a concerted effort at PHMSA. We're working to consolidate our whole regulatory process under my deputy director, and we see good movement. I've had great discussion with the department on moving these mandates forward, too.
What takes so long to implement a rule? We're talking about 2011 and 2016.
Mr. Chairman, I can only really address what I've seen since coming on board about 7 months ago.
Well, as you work to implement several new regulations, are there legacy regulations that need to be updated or eliminated?
I would say that we need to look into seeing if there are more legacy regulations, yes, sir, that need to be updated or regulated. And the team at PHMSA does that regularly, looks to update regulations.
Are there impediments to implementing regulations that you feel like you need legislative fixes to implement them? I mean, we're searching here. We've had a number of conversations here on, you know, Congress passes laws. You would expect once a law is passed, signed into law, that it gets implemented very, very quickly. We're talking 2011. So, you know, we've had an ongoing frustration here on why it would take so long to pass something, let alone something that we passed in 2016. But when young Mr. Schuster was a chair of this subcommittee, 2011, those still aren't even implemented. What can we do to help you?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I certainly share your frustrations. I can tell you that after 40 years in the freight rail industry where things moved at a pretty rapid pace, to me there were some frustrations taking over the leadership at PHMSA about some of the sluggishness. We are doing everything that we can within PHMSA to expedite, streamline the process, so at least that part of the rulemaking process that we have control of at PHMSA that we can move through in a much quicker pace than we have historically. That work is ongoing. I am a man that believes that actions speak louder for words. We're working on that now, and I hope that in the not-too-distant future you'll be able to see some of the results of that action.
Thank you. Mr. Capuano. Mr. DeFazio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You started to say, in response to the chairman, that you could only speak to what you'd seen since you arrived 7 months ago in terms of why the rulemaking is so delayed. You didn't get to answer that or didn't finish that thought, I don't think. Could you?
Ranking Member DeFazio, good morning to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
I have to, I think, tell you that coming into the role at the head of PHMSA and beginning to understand the whole regulatory process, including the backlogs of open mandates, I think it's fair to say that there were a number of explanations as to why the open mandates seemed to languish, even those from the 2011 Pipes Act. But what I've really tried to focus on is understanding the concern. I mean, from the first day that I came to PHMSA, there were regular dialogue about why are these mandates not moving any faster. And going back to my confirmation hearing, I said that we need to prioritize, but we can't reduce quality and we can't reduce safety. So I think we've done the prioritization part, at least from what I've been able to see from my time at PHMSA. Again, we're working to make the whole regulatory process at PHMSA much more streamlined. We've made good progress. I think there's more work to do. But I do hope, Ranking Member DeFazio, that this is something that will be sustainable for years to come. Mm-hmm. I'm also learning, that there are some reviews that take place outside of PHMSA that also play a role in the whole regulatory process, and I'm learning quickly about that.
Yeah, I think we'd be talking about OMB. They hold up a lot of things over there. Are you bound by this 2-for-1 rule? So you're going to have to repeal 2 things to, like, for instance, you mentioned that rupture detection, which is a very, very high priority of the Congress, is still in the NPRM stage.
Right.
If you're going to move forward with that, are you going to have to find 2 other rules to repeal?
Yeah. Congressman, one, I think, bit of good news is, at least my experience in dealing with the regulatory reform process is that we've been able to basically, in the case of the gas rule, we've been actually able to streamline the bill. It was actually getting too complex, and I worried that it would be too complex for operators to implement, and I do honestly think that that could have a negative impact on public safety. So no, I don't think that's been an impediment at all. With regards to the leak detection rule, I mean, I asked the same questions. I mean, it seems to me that this is a very important rule. There are some people that thought, some of the elements of that rule were included in the liquid pipeline rule. But I am comfortable with the fact that a lot of the leak detection, rupture detection elements that provide the greatest protection actually go back to the original integrity management rule that was put in place a number of years ago. So it's not as if there aren't any rupture or leak detection ingredients in the rulemaking. It's just that this is going to enhance that, that part of the rule.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea is, I mean, we've had incidents, Enbridge and others, where, quite a period of time elapsed between, the initial leak and their capability, and then also automatic shutoffs. So, I would hope that both of those things are going to move along. I mean, the integrity management obviously didn't work in those cases, or the California gas explosion. I think we need something more than the basic integrity program to assure public safety and also protection for the environment. One other quick question. I don't want to overuse my time here. The PHMSA is also working on a rule to require railroads to develop and implement comprehensive oil spill response plans. Where are we at on that?
So that rule is moving forward as well. I need to inform you all that I am recused from that rule, but I can give you my perspective. That rule is something very near and dear to my heart after spending 40 years in the railroad. I'm proud of the work that we did at the railroad that I worked on in developing a very solid, comprehensive spill plan. I think it's something that all railroads need. I do understand the nuances that came into play after we started moving unit trains of petroleum crude oil and ethanol. So I can assure you, and the team at PHMSA understands that this is a rule that we're moving through pretty quickly. It was one that was, I wouldn't say was on a back burner, but it's now on a front burner, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fiorelli, for being here today. And you've been there several months, and I think I've seen a pickup in the pace of some of these things moving. But as Chairman Denham and I think Mr. DeFazio expressed, there's bipartisan concern and frustration. So again, we want to encourage you to move forward. And I think, as Chairman Denham said, if there's something we can do legislatively to assist, we're standing ready, willing, and able to do that. In the 2011 bill, one of the priorities that I had in the bill was to set up training facilities across the United States. I know you set up one in Oklahoma City, and by all counts and reports, it's producing. It's been successful, I think. And I just wanted to know the proliferation of pipelines throughout the Northeast, and hopefully into the New England states, if we can get New York to finally get off their hands and get that gas to New England. Is there any plans for establishing other training facilities? I know Pennsylvania is very, very interested in working, and quite frankly, it was the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission that came to me with that idea, and it seemed like a good idea. So can you address that?
So, Mr. Chairman, good morning. It's very good to see you today. Training and education of our inspectors, as well as the broader emergency response community, is something that I strongly believe.
Can you pull your mic a little closer to you? The whole box will move. Thanks.
You're correct about our training facility in Oklahoma City. I mentioned in my oral comments that I do think it's a world-class facility. Just received accreditation, international accreditation, so that we can start issuing credits for the training that we do. But to answer your question, I think it's something that we talk about regularly, and I met with some of the leadership of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission back in February at their winter conference. My real concern is making sure that if we move away from doing training at other than the Oklahoma training facility where we bring in our federal and state inspectors now, to ensure that that same level of training that we can transfer to remote sites. And the reason that I say that, because if we can't, if somehow we're providing substandard training to the inspectors, then to me that has a direct impact on public safety, because the inspectors are not providing the same level of public safety. So the answer is we're looking into it, but I have to understand better how we can take this world-class training that we're doing in Oklahoma City and transfer that to remote facilities, if we can do that at all. I do understand the convenience of it. When we met with the Pennsylvania delegation, one of their big concerns was about the level of convenience having people go out to Oklahoma City. But right now, that is the place to go, because we know the consistency of the training out there. And our goal is to make sure that every state and every federal inspector has the possible best training, whether or not it's for liquid, gas, or underground storage facilities. And as soon as we can figure out how to bottle that and move it someplace else, we can do that.
Well, I appreciate that you want to make sure that the training is world-class. And so as you move forward, I know that Pennsylvania and many of the other mid-Atlantic states are very interested in that, because, again, there is a convenience that people don't have to fly halfway across the country. And the training for pipeline inspection, whether it's a state inspector or a federal inspector, basically, is that correct?
Say that again, sir.
If a state inspector and a federal inspector, they're basically, a pipeline's a pipeline to, different pipelines, but their training should be identical, correct?
It is very similar, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. And the second question I have is in the 2016 bill that Mr. Denham shepherded through to law, Section 16 provides for an entity subject to the order, an opportunity for a petition and review of an administrative law judge. Under the emergency order authority, but the final regulation I don't believe is done yet. Will you be including in that to allow for the petition for review by an administrative law judge as required by the statute?
Chairman Schuster, thank you for the question. So that rule is in the final rule stage, and the answer to your question is yes, it does have the provision that would allow review by an administrative law judge.
Great, great. And then just finally comment that I know that many of the pipeline companies around the country are developing and implementing, or they want to implement new technologies. Their big concern is, though, going out and spending millions of dollars to deploy this new technology and make this pipeline safer, and PHMSA's not keeping up with them. And their concern is they go out and put this money out there, and then PHMSA makes a rulemaking, and they've got to go back and redo what they've already done. So that's, again, that's a great concern, I know, from industry, and something that I hope you and your folks at PHMSA are going to keep your eye on that ball, because, again, that would be not a good thing to spend money on those types of technologies and those kinds of safety improvements and then just having to redo them. So again, your attention to that would be greatly appreciated from our standpoint.
Well, Congressman, we are addressing that, and I share that exact concern, having gone out to see just how quickly the safety technology is advancing in the pipeline industry. And I use the analogy, it was very similar in the railroad side, and I basically say in the not too distant future, the technology will be there to preclude a lot of these catastrophic incidents from ever occurring. We have to be smart enough to get out of the way of that smart technology.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Capuano.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Ms. Elliott. Ms. Elliott, you have enough staffing over at PHMSA to get your job done?
Yes, we do. I will tell you, when I came on board, I was a bit concerned. When I was getting my initial briefs, we had 40 vacancies, and most of those were in field inspection positions. The answer is, why do we have so many vacancies, is, as you might imagine, on the pipeline side where we...
That's fair, but you have enough staffing to get your job done?
We do, and I will tell you that...
Fair enough. You have enough funding for that staffing and for the things you need to do?
We do right now.
How's your relationship with OMB?
I think the relationship is fine. I mean, I think
you have enough staffing, you have enough funding.
We do.
You get along with OMB. Well, and again, I'm not even sure I can ask you this question because you haven't been there long enough, but of course that leads to the question, if you have enough staffing, you have enough funding, you get along with OMB, what's taking so long? And I don't really want to ask you because, you haven't been there long enough. I appreciate that. I'm not going to blame you. What about some of the guys behind you? Have they been there long enough to answer the question? Because there's got to be somebody there who's been there more than a couple of months.
Well, Congressman, I believe that a good part of the staff at PHMSA shares the same frustration you do and that I do about moving regulations through.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, I get all that. But, come on, 8 years? 8 years? And we're not talking about small, unimportant things. We're talking about a regulation talking about what's the maximum pressure that can be used in a pipeline. I think that's kind of important, and I don't know a whole lot about pipelines. I just know if you put too much pressure in a balloon, it pops. And I assume the same thing happens with pipelines. We're talking about pipelines, automatic or remote shutoff valves. Why? Because pipelines are pretty long, and they go through long areas where there's nobody there. And if you don't have those, somebody has to get in a truck and drive for hours to go shut off a valve that's gone pop. Those are the kinds of regulations we're talking about, not small little things. And you're telling me we have enough staffing, you have enough funding, you get along with OMB. I don't understand the problem. And the reason I ask is because we go through this every once in a while. PHMSA is a relatively new agency. I know you know that. Reauthorization's coming up, I think, next year. I'm trying to ask myself, why should I have an agency that I actually believe in? I think it's the right thing to have PHMSA. But if you're not doing your job, why bother? And if I do have you, why shouldn't we tie your funding to actually getting some of the job done? Now, again, I'm not kidding to sit here and argue about regulations that are 6 months overdue. Fine, I get all that. 8 years? 8 years for not just one difficult regulation, but for multiple. And again, I don't want to blame you. You haven't been there 8 years. Has there anybody who's been there for 8 years?
Yes, there's a number of staff that have been there 8 years.
I'm a little bit more than frustrated, to be honest with you. I'm kind of angry. I would rather be sitting here fighting with you about the substance of your regulations that maybe I don't like or whatever, but I can't even do that. Honestly, when you want to build pipelines, it makes my job darn near impossible to look at my constituents and say, trust PHMSA. Trust somebody that your safety is good. When I don't have a regulation that says, what's too much to put into the pipeline? When I don't have a regulation that says, how are we going to turn these things off when they do fail? When I don't have an agency that sits there and tells me something on the order of 35 to 50% of the accidents we have had are preventable. It feels like nobody cares. Now, I know that's an overstatement, and I actually think you care, and I actually like PHMSA. I like when you do stuff, you seem to do it pretty well. But it seems like when you don't want to do stuff, you just don't do it. And for me, that kind of bodes poorly for reauthorization. It means I'm going to be looking at ways to get you to do your job. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm hoping when reauth comes around that these are done and you can sit there and say, Congressman, we did them all, and I'm going to clap, and that's great, and let's move forward. But if not, of course, by that time, I'll be sitting in the big chair where Mr. Denham is. That's called optimism. And when we are, we're going to have a different conversation. Again, I know you knew, and I don't mean to beat you up, but you knew this was coming. It's not what you do, it's what you don't do. That you haven't been asked to do, you've been required to do. These are not requests. And by the way, mandates from Congress are exempted from the president's own executive order, that 2-for-1 nonsense. If you got an old regulation, you should repeal it anyway. You shouldn't have to be told by daddy to repeal something that's no longer useful. Those are exempt. I appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate the chairman's tolerance.
Congressman, my job, my responsibility is to make you feel good about PHMSA again.
Thank you. Mr. Faso, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elliott, the concern that I have is along the lines with what Mr. Capuano was expressing in his very expressive way, the delay on the hazardous liquid rule, for instance. I represent a district in upstate New York that includes, among the 11 counties I represent, Schoharie County, where in 1991 there was a explosion along a propane gas line in Blenheim, New York, that killed 2 people. And obviously, you can't go to that community today and talk about pipelines without many people having a very vivid recollection of that. So I'd like you don't have to respond on this today unless you can, but I'd like to know the status of the regulatory oversight on that particular line, and expressing to you my concern with additional delay, because the automatic shutoff valves and the leak detection systems, this is quite an old system that we have in that part of our state. And it's vitally important, I think, that people be reassured as to the safety of that system, and that the federal and state agencies are doing what they can to ensure that incidents like that are not going to occur in the future, and that we're making every effort to ensure that incidents like that don't occur in the future.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll look into that and make sure that we respond back to you. I do share your concerns in my railroad days, having spent a lot of time up in your neck of the woods. You know, any incident is an incident that we don't want to have, especially those that end up resulting in casualties, including injuries and fatalities. And you know, we will look closely at what we can continue to do to improve the safety of transmission, distribution, and gathering lines. I've talked a little bit about it through some of the research and development that we're trying to put in place that will help us look over the horizon on what's the next best technology. And I do think that the integrity management systems, the safety management systems that we talk regularly about and enforce with the operators are making some headway. And then I do think it's the quality of the inspectors that are out there working with the operators every day and in communities such as yours to make sure that we keep them as safe as possible. But I do share your concern.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing back from you on that particular topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Esty, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you being with us here today. You understand a high level of frustration here, and that's concern. I mean, it's not frustration about our prerogatives being disrespected. This is about the people we represent. 64% of energy in this country is carried through pipelines, 64%. PHMSA reported 649 pipeline incidents last year, 649, half of which were designated serious or significant, resulting in 22 fatalities of people we represent, 35 injuries, and more than $242 million in damages. The failure to implement these mandated requirements result in deaths. When I was serving the state legislature, we had a new natural gas plant explode in Connecticut for failure to follow proper procedures. 6 people lost their lives. So we need to know what exactly is the holdup here. What possibly can be, if you've got, again, as Mr. Capuano said, you have enough funding, you have the resources, then why is this not happening? Because the consequences at a time when we are expanding pipelines, right? This administration has a commitment to expand resources and energy production in the United States. Almost all of that is flowing through pipelines. So you can understand we have extremely severe concern about the consequences of 6, 7, 8-year-old mandates that have yet to be implemented. So we are facing a really serious question here of how we do our duty in oversight and in resourcing your agency to protect the American people. So again, I would ask, what exactly is the holdup?
Congresswoman, I share your concerns and thank you for the question. I can't put my finger on any one item or thing that's the holdup. I can only tell you that we will continue to work very, very hard to move these very meaningful regulations through to conclusion. And as I said in my comments, I think it's going to take more than just the regulations, though. I think it's going to take continued conversation with all the shareholders, the stakeholders, the public, industry, and other government agencies to make sure that we get that last bit of safety. I mean, as much as we talk about the incidents that occur, and they seem to be, when we hear them, to be an alarming number, it is still the safest way to move energy products in this country. What my job is, what the job of PHMSA is to work with you all to make sure that we can get that last little bit of safety. Unfortunately, what we see today are not maybe some of the minor incidents that were of large number, but now what we're seeing, unfortunately, might be more of those less frequent but very high consequence kind of incidents that do create casualties. That's what I'm focused on. That's what the team at PHMSA is focused on. So again, my job is to make you and the members of the subcommittee believe in PHMSA again through action.
Well, I'll tell you, in New England, we have a real critical shortage, and there are efforts to try to expand pipelines. It's very hard for me to go to my constituents and urge them to do this when we have we have congressionally mandated safety regulations that have not even been introduced or promulgated for years. How can I go to my constituents and say, trust, we're from the government, trust us? We can't do that responsibly. And so I will tell you, there's a great deal of concern. We are facing energy shortages and price hikes in my part of the country, in my state, and yet, at the same time, we are facing regulations that have been mandated and aren't in place. So if you need more people, tell us. Because asking for more time we are impatient because we are concerned about the safety of the people we represent. So again, I would urge you in the strongest possible terms to identify for us what we can do to move this forward, because truly the ball's in your court. And we are not patient at this point. Thank you. I realize you haven't been here long, but again, this needs to be done, and it is now your responsibility to do so. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Ms. Esty. Mr. Gallagher, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. As a new member of the committee, I look forward to working with you. So PHMSA has been exploring changes to the Gas Transmission Integrity Management Program and gathering pipeline regulations since 2011. These changes were supposed to be finalized in a single rulemaking that was supposed to be issued this summer, if I'm understanding this correctly. However, a couple of months ago, PHMSA split that single rulemaking into 3 separate rules covering separate gathering and transmission pipeline issues with revised publication dates of 2019. So just so I understand it, why did PHMSA split that rulemaking at this late stage?
Congressman, thank you for the question. The answer to the rule or answer to the question is the fact that to move that regulation along in as unwieldy of a state that it was would cause even further delay. The way that we have broken the rule into 3 parts, the first 2 deal with transmission lines, the third deals with gathering line, but the first 2 will deal with the 2 open mandates as well as an NTSB recommendations. So the plan was we're going to move them all forward, but that part of the rule now that has the open mandates and the recommendations is the one that we're going to give the most attention to. What I don't want to convey is the belief that just because we have split that rule into 3, that we're not going to continue to move the other parts of the rule through as quickly as possible. We're going to do that. It's just going to make it more manageable for us to move it through the process.
Why then did the publication dates get pushed out an entire year?
I'll have to look into that. I'm not sure of the exact reasons that the dates have been pushed out.
Okay, look forward to following up with you on that. And then it seems to moving forward on the pipeline valve and rupture detection rulemaking.
Yes, we are. And as I had mentioned earlier, of the 3 priority regulations, the liquid rule, the gas rule, and the rupture detection rule, that is the one that is probably the furthest behind at the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. But we're going to fast track that the best that we can. But again, I also want to remind you that a lot of the integrity management regulations cover a lot of the leak and rupture detection. This will modernize it. It will create some additional safety measures, but it's not by any means the only leak and detection rules that we have.
Yeah, can you give me an example of the current policies that are in place to address rupture detection in pipelines?
Well, I think perhaps for me, based on some of my experience, the best example is the modernization of a number of the oil and gas control sites. I've been out in my time at PHMSA to look at those sites, and I'm very impressed with the continuing improvements in the software that the control rooms that monitor the flow of both gas and liquid pipelines, the ability to identify any anomaly that would indicate either a leak or a rupture. And again, as I said, I've been a long-time believer in the fact that I think technology and automation is where we're going to get to the next levels of safety. But to me, that's where I've been the most impressed with the work that I'm seeing done in the control rooms.
Well, I look forward to following up on that one issue, and thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. Series, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here. I represent, in New Jersey, probably the most congested area in the country. Just to give you an idea, I live in a town that is 1 square mile, it's got 51,000 people on it. Okay, Hoboken, New Jersey has another 1 square miles or 50,000 people. A few years ago, we had an incident in Edison, New Jersey. And we found out that the pipe was 3 feet wide. And it was right next to an apartment complex. I don't know, well, they said it was deep enough, but I don't know how you deal with these pipes that are so big and so large next to apartment complexes. And the maintenance of them, since it was so deep, I don't know how much maintenance they did on that pipe when it blew up. And quite frankly, I have sat across people that want to put pipelines in my community when I was mayor. And the district is one of these districts where you put a shovel in the ground, you're bound to hit either a cable or a water pipe, but they dangle money in front of these communities. And I get concerned that maybe it's not as large as this 3 feet pipe. Some of these are very close to the top of the ground. And I am one that feels that these regulations that we have tried to implement since 2011, I think is needed. So when I keep hearing all the time that we expedite, and we're working on it, and we're working on the regulation, and we're moving quickly, we're streamlining this, I just hope it doesn't take another big blow-up like what happened in Edison for us for you to move on some of this regulation, because it's going to be catastrophic. And half of these pipes don't even serve New Jersey. They come from Texas right into New York. We are just what they call interlaced piping. Is that the proper word that you use in the industry? They all come in and they fill in and they go into another one. And the other concern that I have, which always been a concern, is about the communications between the local firefighters and the people who put the pipe and where the shut-off valves are. I don't know if the industry does that to a degree that's satisfactory to the communities that they run through. Because they have to be aware where the shut-off valves are. They have to be aware that these pipes are being maintained. And they have to communicate with the local firefighters, because at the end of the day, they are the first responders. So all these safety features that we're talking here are extremely important for a district that is so congested. So I would hope that you would move quickly on some of these things, especially the ones that are the most important for the safety of these pipes. And I really don't have any particular question other than try to get you to move on the safety of these, these pipes. Can you imagine these pipes 3 feet wide next to an apartment complex? Nobody knew it was there. That's another factor. I think they keep it quiet half of the time so they don't tell the community, so they come out to the town meetings and put pressure on the local officials not to allow it. And, and quite frankly, they run through, for example, Jersey City, right under the Hudson River, right into New York. So, sir, I will ask you, I know you've only been there 7 months, but quite frankly, this is something that has to be addressed before there is another incident. And then everybody reacts. By that time, it's too late. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. Mr. Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott, now that you've been at PHMSA for a few months, what are your biggest priorities? And I was here earlier, and then I had to leave to go to another hearing and back in here. If you've already talked about this, please let me know. But what are your biggest priorities as it relates to the outstanding rulemakings at PHMSA? What are your number 1, 2, 3 on down?
Congressman Babin, thank you for the question. They're all important, and I think the comments of the subcommittee underscore the sense of urgency, even more so now that we need to have in moving those mandates forward. I do think that, focusing primarily on moving the safety of liquid pipeline and the safety of gas transmission pipelines are my primary top goals. I think by moving those forward, we get the best success in closing a number of open mandates as well as NTSB and GAO recommendations. But I know there's a lot more behind there that we have to do, and I think kind of an equal priority is the fact that we can't lose our momentum. As I said earlier, I think we have to prove by our actions, not our words, that we're capable of moving forward with open mandates and with all other rules and standards that promote the safety of moving energy products throughout this country. We all know that we need that energy to do that. So, and I think, another priority is making sure that we have the most professional staff available, especially in the inspection side of PHMSA, to make sure that each and every day when our inspection and investigation staff is out in the field, that we know that we've got the best talent available out there working with the operators to ensure that the nation's pipeline system stays as safe as possible.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Have you had the opportunity to go into the field and to see pipeline operations firsthand? Have you had that opportunity yet?
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for that question as too. I'm an old railroader. I'm my happiest when I have my boots and hard hat on. I really am. Okay. And fortunately, the last few months I've been able to get out, and I've traveled a lot. I've, to Pennsylvania to see how natural gas pipeline is being installed, so I can actually get in a ditch and see it. Thanks to my colleagues from Williams for allowing me to do that. Going to places too. I think that seeing firsthand and, being able to go up to Bellingham and talk to Carl Weimer and his team about that. I mean, that's a humbling experience.
Right.
I went in my 40 years on the railroad to a lot of derailments, and I saw a lot of impact to communities and to the environment. But I'm not sure, after hearing the folks up there relive the events of 1999, that anything compares to something of that magnitude. And I will tell you, too, that, trips to Texas to see pipeline operations and then to see the work of the pipeline industry in trying to push as fast as they can safety technology and inline inspection devices, it was really important for me to see and to be able to talk to the vendors to try to understand what's on the horizon for them, what's the next best safety technology. So,
well, I was going to ask you if you had met with stakeholders and community leaders, and it sounds like you have. And is that accurate?
Some, but not enough. I mean, I think as my travels continue this year, it's really getting out to talk more to the public sector side stakeholders. I've had the great pleasure to talk to the members of our Public Information Sharing Working Group, the members of our Gas and Pipeline Advisory Groups. I've been out to a number of trade association conferences, so I've had a chance to talk to stakeholders. I think what I need to do is kind of balance that with talking more to some of the folks in the local communities.
Well, you mentioned Texas, and of course my district is from Houston to Louisiana, and that portion of Texas. It has the largest pipeline infrastructure in the nation, more than 439,771 miles of pipeline, representing about 1/6 of the total pipeline mileage of the entire country, a substantial portion of which is in the southeast Texas coast that Congressman Weber and I share and represent. And I would like to personally invite you to come visit our region at your next available opportunity.
Thank you, Congressman. I will tell you that I saw more various types of pipe in the supply yards in 5 minutes than I had in all my life before I went to to see the pipeline system in Houston. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Garamendi is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Elliott, thank you very much for your testimony and for appearing today. I know that you have a difficult task catching up with the history of non-compliance by your agency. I was here for the hearings in 2010 following the San Bruno, and these photos were displayed at that time. That's a picture of the actual explosion. That's the 100-foot by 28-foot crater that was created. And those are the homes, and I suppose you might find the, well, we'll just say those are the homes that were burned. It's been 8 years, just short of 8 years, since that explosion. The mandate in the 2010 law has not yet been completed. We remain extremely concerned about this. The automatic shutoff, the detection systems are known. They've existed for years. Pipeline companies across the nation do employ automatic shutoffs and remote shutoff valves, but yet there's no regulation that requires that they be in place for the 30 or the 3-foot diameter pipe that Mr. Sirius was talking about a moment ago, or for other pipelines across the nation that are in high hazard or high exposure zones. Could you tell me what the status is of the specific regulations on shutoff valves, remote and automatic, and on the pressure requirement systems?
Congressman, yes, and thank you for your question. And you know, the San Bruno incident also was the same year that we had a serious incident in Michigan in the Kalamazoo River.
Serious in that 8 people died.
Yes, and 51 injured, I believe, too, in there. So, as I had mentioned earlier, the status of the rupture detection valve rule is a bit behind the liquid and gas rules. It's in the notice of proposed
rulemaking. Could you define bit behind?
Well, it's in the notice of proposed rulemaking stage, so I cannot say specifically time-wise how far behind.
Is there any reason you do not have a timeline for the rulemaking process?
I just do not have enough understanding of where we're at in the notice of proposed rulemaking drafting, and once we can complete that, then I can provide a better timeline.
You've been there 7 months, and we understand that's a short period of time. If you do not have a calendar for the 2018-19 year, I'll be happy to deliver one to your office. We have congressional calendars that we hand out to our constituents. I'll be happy to deliver you one. Could you put on that calendar a specific date in which you will address this issue?
I understand your concern, Congressman, and we will
I'll have a calendar in your office. Perhaps you can return it to me with a circle around the dates in which you will begin the process. Is that possible?
Congressman, you have my word that we will move that rulemaking through as quickly as we can.
No, I want a calendar date.
I can't do that, sir. I
Why?
can't move it because I just don't know what calendar date it would be.
Why don't you know when you can get this thing underway?
Congressman, I appreciate your concern. We will work as quickly as we can to move that rulemaking through.
I'm going to be on you like a bad spell. And I can assure you that the California delegation will be there also. It was September 9th, 2010. 8 people died. 38 homes were destroyed. And you don't have a calendar. That's not acceptable, sir. It is simply not acceptable. A final rule, not on this particular issue, but on hazardous liquid pipelines, was completed, was to go into the Federal Registry on January 13th, 2017. And this administration pulled that back the very first day it came into office. What is the status of that particular regulation?
Congressman, that rule is in the final rule stage, and we hope to move that forward as quickly as possible, too.
Do you have a date?
No, sir, I do not.
You don't have a calendar either?
I do not have a date.
Perhaps you can have those two circles, a red and a black circle around a specific date and when you'll get the job done. You've shined this on. You and your predecessors have shined this committee on for 8 years. And it's over, sir. Give us a calendar date on when you're going to begin the process, to move the process along, and when it will be completed. I'm out of time. I yield back. And a calendar will be in your office later today.
Thank you, Congressman.
Mr. Perry is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Elliott, for your presence over here, way on the right here, so to speak. In your experience, are all 50 states, just so to speak, are all 50 states equal in quality in their regulation of interstate pipeline facilities? And let me just maybe add some context to that. You know, I'm from Pennsylvania. We've got a lot of resources. We've got a lot of old infrastructure, and one of the struggles we're having right now, and we've had for some time, is to get our product to market. And some states aren't as, and God bless them, we have the Constitution, and they have voters, and you know, they make decisions for their states, but depending on where they're located, they're in between other states that would like to have access to what Pennsylvania has. And I know that maybe, unfortunately, I'm conflating construction and regulation with operation, but I will tell you, my constituents, and I don't think most people see it, they just see a pipeline, or they see a lack of a pipeline. And I'm sure you know we had an incident with a pipeline running across part of the district in south central Pennsylvania, and the Department of Environmental Protection got involved with the contractor with some infractions and so on and so forth, and that further imperils people's feeling of security and satisfaction with pipelines in general, right? If there's they don't differentiate between construction and operation, right? But I'm just wondering, is this are they generally equal in their quality of regulation and enforcement of those things? And is there something that the federal government should be doing, could be doing, in keeping with the Constitution and the state's 10th Amendment rights, but yet to you know, move interstate commerce to where it needs to be going?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I would say that you know, there is consistency between the states, but I think to answer the very specific nature of your question, I'd like to go back and talk to my staff about it and get a more detailed response and respond back to you if I might.
Well, I would appreciate that, and like I said, just with the understanding that this is specific, and you obviously know your job very well, and you're here testifying on it today, but most people driving up and down the highway, looking at farm fields and what have you, they see pipeline, whether they see markers or whether they see construction, and they don't differentiate between operation and construction, but they don't want problems, right? They want to make sure that they can buy what's coming through the pipeline, and they understand it's got to get to places for refining and other things, but they want to make sure that it's safe, and they're counting on you and us to make sure that we're respecting individual property rights and states' rights, but at the same time, the interstate commerce that needs to happen so that states that are landlocked out of, and I'm not going to name any here, but I suspect you can imagine where we're headed here, but states that are landlocked out of having the provisions that they want and need because of states in the way, and what's the appropriate response to that, and is there a regulatory response, or is there something else that Congress needs to be doing or that states need to be doing? And I'd like to have you fashion your staff's answers, so to speak, in that kind of vein, if you would, please. And I appreciate your presence here, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank the gentleman. Recognize Mr. Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Administrator Elliott. My California colleagues, Representative Carvajal and Senator Feinstein, wrote a letter to you on May 17th requesting an update on the status of the rulemaking regarding automatic and remote control shutoff valves. As you're aware, this happened in 2015 that we had the Refugio oil spill in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
Major disaster, 100,000 gallons of oil spilled into the ocean and shut down commercial fisheries. The shutoff valves and leak detection technology could have prevented the environmental and public health damage caused by the tragedy. Could you give me the status of that rulemaking and when you can expect to answer that letter?
Congresswoman, thank you. I am aware of the letter that came in, and we're preparing the response for that letter. With regards to the rulemaking, again, the leak detection rulemaking is one that we're going to work quickly on. It's in the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. We have some work to do on it in order to get it to the final rule stage, but it is my pledge to you that we will continue to move forward on that rulemaking as quickly as we can, ma'am.
Well, I look forward to your answer, sir, and I would like to have a copy of that letter to Mr. Carvajal and Senator Feinstein. Mr. Elliott, because of your background in the railroad industry, which you've pointed out, and your current position, I have a question regarding the intersection of pipeline safety and railroad operations. And I have to report that after 8 years of negotiations between Kinder Morgan Pipeline Company and Union Pacific, Cal Poly Pomona University, and the Alameda Corridor East Public Transportation Agency in my district, 2 rail grade crossings are being closed because of a new division track for Union Pacific. The project will reduce congestion, reduce smog, and increase public safety by allowing the residents in the valley to travel on a major corridor without stopping at 2 previous railroad crossings. Project was held up for 8 years because the new rail line ran over Kinder Morgan pipeline. And there was a disagreement between Union Pacific and Kinder Morgan on the level of protection needed for the pipeline, one type of cement versus another. Are you aware of these ongoing disagreements between railroads and pipeline companies across the country on the level of safety when they cross? And what would you do to solve these issues to speed up the projects and improve the safety?
Congresswoman, thank you for your question. I will tell you from my railroad experience that any time we can close a highway railroad grade crossing, that's a good thing because it promotes safety. And I can also tell you from my railroad experience managing environmental matters for the railroad, we were often in dialogue with pipeline operators to ensure the safety of pipelines underneath the railroad right-of-ways. And I think we saw that progress over the years, and I think we saw safety improve as well with the advent of horizontal directional drilling that allowed the pipelines to actually go further underneath the right-of-ways. As you know, probably from your experience, our concern on the railroad is the vibration underneath the railroad bed, so we were always concerned about making sure that the pipes were far enough down that that vibration didn't impact the lines. So, and I would expect that the railroads today continue to have good dialogue with their counterparts at the oil and gas companies to make sure that they're having those crossings as safe as possible.
But are you addressing those issues?
I will have to look more into that to see if we've got any current issues dealing with both oil and gas pipeline operators and the railroads. So, and I can consult with my colleagues over at the Federal Railroad Administration.
Would you kindly let this committee know? Because that is an important issue when it has an impact on public safety.
Yes, ma'am, we'll let you know.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognized himself for 5 minutes. You're aware of the Line 5 pipeline in Michigan and some of the challenges we've had with that, Mr. Elliott?
I am.
One of the challenges we face is the delay in regulations while they try to comply, and both in terms of what the regulatory requirements are as well as what the public perception of the safety of that pipeline is. I am concerned. I want you to understand on a bipartisan basis, the delays are really causing a great deal of distress of the public as well as state agencies to ensure full compliance in a safe environment. So let me go back around about that question again. What do we do about ensuring that we can give a timeline to folks what the safety regulations will be so they're out for review and we can address those?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I think I have a newfound appreciation for the subcommittee's sense of urgency on this issue. I've had the pleasure to speak with some of you individually, but collectively, your concerns are magnified, and I think I understand that. We continue to do everything that we can within PHMSA to move the issues and prepare the regulations, those things under our control. We've had very good discussions with the department about the need to move some of these mandates forward, and they're very responsive to that. And as you know, there's multiple steps in the process, but I can assure you that while I can't provide a specific date or time, that with the liquid rule and the gas rule and the rupture detection rule, those will move as quickly as we possibly can move them.
Well, let me stop you because you're aware of the leak that we had in the Kalamazoo River a few years back. Are you aware of the anchor strike on the pipeline crossing the Sioux Straits? You're aware of that, and in fact, the pipeline was dented. It was not. You're aware of that as well.
Yeah, I've had numerous conversations with the executives at Enbridge on that issue. Yeah.
And I understand the economic importance of Line 5 in the state, in my district. It crosses the St. Clair River in my district, across from Port Huron to Sarnia. So it's not that I'm immune to what the issues are, but the reality is a lack of clear guidance as to whether the current technology is acceptable that's in place, when we need to change that. Is really troublesome for both the state to ensure compliance, the company, Enbridge, as you note, as well as the public impression. So while I appreciate your comments regarding we'll do the best we can in terms of timing, I would join my colleague, Mr. Garamundi, to say, you know, jointly I'm sure we can give you a calendar. And at some point in time, I ran a business for 35 years. Setting a date that we're going to get something done by matters. So I can't encourage you enough, or your agency enough, to say we need to set dates. We need to get the regs out. We need to get public comment on them, and we need to take that public comment seriously, or we leave ourselves vulnerable. One more question for you in the limited time I have. What does, a little more general, what does PHMSA do with funding to states that do not comply with safety standards in place at this time?
Congressman, thank you for the question. You know, as you know, we can fund up to 80% of a state's ability to conduct pipeline inspections. We have a group within PHMSA that is specifically responsible for going to ensure the quality, the integrity of the inspections that are done by our state partners. Their funding basically is based on their ability to show success within the program.
Let me stop you there. What are the ways that you hold states accountable if they fail to comply?
I think we have a number of ways, but the specifics of those, I can look further into what those items are and get back to you.
Let me stop you a second. I know it's been 7 months, and
yes,
Lord knows you're up to your eyeballs. That's clear. A response of, I think there are ways, troubles me a great deal. Do we not have a better idea than how we hold states accountable for funding their inspection, or 80% of the inspection costs? Does any of your staff behind you have any idea what we do with this?
Yeah. Congressman, I'm certain there are, but again, I just don't have the specifics that would provide me to give you a specific answer.
Can we request that you provide something to the committee in writing what the specifics are in terms of holding them accountable, and how you, if it is a funding and other mechanism? One more quick question, if you'll bear with me a moment. How many states, last time you reviewed it, were not in compliance?
You know, we have a regular process that allows us to look at state noncompliance. I don't have the exact number that were not compliance. I can add that to the document.
When was the last time that this review was done to determine whether states were in compliance?
Yeah, sir, I don't know that. I'll have to determine that and get back to you. You recognize a number of times you said, I don't know, in the last 10 minutes, right? Yes.
I appreciate it. I will, who's next then? Mr. Weber. Yeah, I chair yours for 5 minutes, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to commend you compliment you, congratulate you for taking on this assignment. And, you know, looking at your background, it seems as though you have a lot of experience in transporting hazardous materials and compliance with regulations. And so we do have big expectations of you, okay? And applaud you for taking on this assignment. But as you know, in many cases, many of the companies have already started and gone a long ways toward implementation of some of these various regulations. But you know, in good government and in good business, people have goals. They have a mission. They have work plans. They have timelines. And in your case, you got a mandate to get this done. And I want to join my colleagues here. As you'll notice, very nonpartisan, very bipartisan, the concerns that have been expressed, and I share all of them with them. So I would just like to remind you and everybody, and I know you know this, but to not have an estimated timeline. Nobody here expects you to be there on an exact date or a moment in time. But we do expect a work plan, and we do expect a timeline. And you've got the experience to put that all together. We know that. You've done good in the past, and you can do that for us here today. And to do otherwise, you know, it'd be hard to judge it as anything other than irresponsible, a dereliction of duty, worst case, malfeasance. And you do not want that to be your legacy, because you're capable of so much more and so much better. So I just want you to know that we're expecting a lot out of you. And when you come back, we don't want to hear "I don't know" anymore. And I would just have one question. Can you give this committee an assurance that you will put a high priority in the planning in your operation to give us a work plan and a timeline for implementation of these mandates?
Congressman, thank you for the good words of wisdom. I will tell you that in my private industry life, all those things you talked about were highly valued, and they're the types of things that I'm trying to put in place at PHMSA, and I will continue to do that. And you know, I will work the best I can to create a more structured timeline so the subcommittee has a much better understanding of the delivery of these open mandates and other rules and standards. I'm just not to the point yet where my crystal ball doesn't allow me to be specific enough, I think, for the satisfaction of the subcommittee, but I will continue to work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Chair, will I recognize Mr. Weber for 5 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elliott, I'm late, so I don't know if these questions have been asked yet. So if they're redundant, please forgive the redundancy. Do you know what the pipeline industry itself safety rating is?
Congressman, it's extremely good. It is above 99.99%.
Above 99.99%. Do you know of any other industry that has a safety rating that high?
Well, I'm happy to say that my former industry, the railroad industry, had a safety rate of above 99.99.
Well, I think you're a little off track now. We're talking pipelines, not railroads. Did y'all see that pun? See what I did there? Yeah, Elizabeth's saying she got it. Here's my question, and it may have been asked, but I commend the pipeline industry for that kind of safety rating. I have the Gulf Coast of Texas, 5 ports. We produce 65% of the nation's jet fuel, almost 20% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. So a lot of pipelines come into the Gulf Coast of Texas. How long have you, and I didn't get a chance to read your bio, how long have you been at the agency?
A little over 7 months, Congressman.
A little over 7 months. So PHMSA has been exploring changes to the hazardous liquid integrity management program. And again, I've not had a chance to read through this. I was in another event. DOT's last report on the status of significant rulemaking showed that the final rule should be issued in August. Have they asked you are you still on track to publish that rule in August?
We continue to be optimistic that the rule will be out, will be the first rule out, and while we can't put a specific date on, we're still shooting for a period of time that's relatively close to what we've published.
So you may be like the Senate, you'll still be working in August?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a listing, I'm sure there is, of the exact materials, liquids, gases, whatever, that this rule covers? Do you have a listing of that?
We can provide that.
Can you get that to me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. That would be great. And then you also have, in my district, we have the largest carbon capture sequestration storage facility in Port Arthur, Texas. It was built actually by ARA, American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. And so we have some underground storage, but how is PHMSA seeking input, or is PHMSA seeking input from states and stakeholders as it relates to underground storage on natural gas? Are y'all seeking that input?
Congressman, we are. We have issued an interim final rule on underground natural gas storage, and we continue to now look at the comments that have been coming in from all stakeholders on that interim final rule, and I'm happy to say that we've begun training state and federal inspectors at our training center in Oklahoma on underground natural gas storage facilities. So we're making good progress there.
You're aware of the shale play in Texas, Eagle Ford shale play, as well as other shale plays. Now, Texas is leading the other 49 lesser states in natural gas production. And so it's a big thing for us. And as that natural gas production in the market is like it is, where natural gas, we're now exporting so much LNG. My district is responsible for exporting about 95% of the nation's LNG worldwide. So it's extremely important to us. As that production ramps up, as natural gas prices stay low, does it give you all a little bit more impetus to try to make sure that you keep up with this on a more frequent basis? Are you paying close attention to the gas plays?
Certainly, yes. I mean, we've actually reallocated resources, technical resources at PHMSA to help us stay as current and as we can on the natural gas, especially on the export side. We continue to work closely with other regulatory agencies such as FERC on the whole siting issue as well. Some of our natural gas rules are ones that we want to modernize. But again, we're working hard because we understand the pace at which that whole sector is moving, and we need to make sure that we can stay up to speed with that.
Is your office, since you've been there 7 months, I know there's been some questions about a lot of some of the nominations that are not making it through the Senate, for example. Is your office adequately staffed?
Yes, sir, it is. We've made significant headways. As I mentioned earlier, when I came on board, we had about 40 vacancies, and a large number of those were in the field inspection investigation side. On the pipeline side, the number was close to 20. I'm happy to say we actually have 15 offers on the table now for new pipeline inspectors. It's been a challenge to find qualified people, but with some changes in our recruiting process, I think we've kind of gotten over the hump on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair recognizes Dr. Napolitano for additional questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for allowing me the second go-around. But I had one more question to add, Administrator Elliott, that one of our priorities in the 2016 Act was to ensure that the coastal beaches and marine coastal waters are considered unusually sensitive areas. For purposes of ensuring pipelines in these areas are governed under PHMSA's integrity management regulations, which include inspection, repair, and maintenance. The DOT website states that this is still in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking stage, and that you have 13 staff working on it, but is delayed due to competing priorities. Would you explain and clarify this?
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. I'm very aware of the need and the sense of urgency of that rulemaking. You know, I've been working to prioritize rulemakings, and I've worked with my staff to make the determination to prioritize and focus most on the mandates that really provided the greatest level of safety. You're correct, it's still in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. We have had a public meeting on that topic, and we're looking at the responses of that. I think one of the difficulties in this specific rulemaking is we're finding it difficult to actually define some of the parameters of the Great Lakes area as it applies to the rulemaking. So it's been a little bit more of a challenge to the staff, but it's something that we're going to keep focusing on and keep moving forward as quickly as we can.
Well, you have 3 great areas, Florida, California, and Texas, that require specific focus on these issues. Anything we can do to ensure this moves along?
Congresswoman, I think what you can all do for me is just, you know, provide me with your thoughts, your comments, your concerns. You know, I do apologize that I'm still getting up to speed on certain areas. But again, I'm a person who believes in actions and not necessarily words as proof of what we're capable of doing at PHMSA.
I'm glad to hear that, sir, and we'll look forward to the answers. Thank you. Yield back.
Congresswoman.
Seeing no further questions, I want to thank you, Administrator Elliott, for your time today, for your testimony and feedback. They've been very helpful, and I'm sure we look forward to seeing you again at a hearing in the future to get more feedback from you, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
I would now like to welcome, we're awaiting votes, so we're going to introduce the next panel, and depending on the schedule of votes, we'll then proceed. I would now like to welcome our second panel if they want to get settled. Good morning, gentlemen. It's still morning. Thank you for coming, and I appreciate it. I'd like to welcome our second panel. We have today Mr. Andrew Black, who's President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines. Thank you for coming. Mr. Robin Rorick, Midstream and Industry Operations Group Director for American Petroleum Institute. Mr. Chad Samarin, Senior Vice President and Corporate Strategic Development, Williams, on behalf of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. That's quite an acronym. And Mr. Carl Weimer, Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust. I ask unanimous consent that our full statements be included in the record without objection. So ordered. Please proceed with testimony. Yeah. Since your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. We will kick off today with Mr. Black. Would you please proceed?
Thank you. I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines. AOPL represents transmission pipeline operators that deliver crude oil, refined products like gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel, and natural gas liquids such as propane and ethane. Our pipelines safely deliver more than 18 billion barrels of crude oil and energy products per year. Pipelines play a critical role in delivering energy to American workers and families. Americans use the energy our pipelines deliver in their cars and trucks to commute to work or drive on the job. Our pipelines transport products like propane that farmers use for rural heating and crop drying, and raw materials such as ethane that American workers use for good-paying manufacturing jobs. Pipelines are an exceedingly safe way to deliver the energy America needs. As the American people debate alternatives for transporting energy across the country from where it's produced to where it's refined to where it's consumed, you can know that pipelines are the safest way for the American people to get the energy they need. According to data collected by PHMSA, the safety of liquid pipelines has improved dramatically over the last 5 years. Liquid pipelines impacting the public or the environment are down 19% since 2013. A subcategory of incidents impacting the public or the environment caused by corrosion, cracking, or pipe failure are down 35% in that period. Incidents impacting the public or the environment caused by operations or maintenance failures are down 24%. These key performance indicators were developed jointly by PHMSA, the Pipeline Safety Trust, and the liquids pipeline industry in recommendation to a response by the NTSB to develop more meaningful metrics for tracking pipeline safety. Each of these safety performance metrics are included in our annual Pipeline Safety Excellence Report we issued jointly with the American Petroleum Institute. Self-reporting on our industry-wide performance is part of our effort to be transparent about our safety programs and invite a conversation on how we can best tackle remaining pipeline safety issues. We use performance data, recommendations from regulators and safety investigations, and lessons learned from incidents and near misses to guide our industry-wide efforts. Based on this information, personnel from member companies participate in nearly 24 industry-wide pipeline groups to improve operations and safety. We're also funding research and development on pipeline inspection technologies, enhancing our threat detection and response capabilities, expanding safety culture in management systems, and boosting our emergency response capabilities. Through our Pipeline Safety Excellence Program, member companies have completed development of a number of recommended practices and technical reports to improve our ability to detect pipeline cracking, integrate safety data, manage safety efforts holistically, manage leak detection programs, and better plan for and respond to pipeline emergencies. We're now actively engaged in implementation efforts to educate, encourage, and help members implement these best practices. A prime example is API Recommended Practice 1173 for pipeline safety management systems, recommended by NTSB and developed in conjunction with PHMSA and state pipeline regulators. Pipeline safety management systems are helping pipeline operators comprehensively and holistically manage all the safety efforts underway across a company. Aviation, nuclear power, and chemical manufacturing have benefited from safety management systems, and pipelines are too. The NTSB said the response to the pipeline safety recommendation on safety management systems, quote, exceeded expectations. Pipeline operators within AOPL and API will complete updates of industry-wide guidance on how to proactively inspect and when to perform preventative maintenance on pipelines, how to protect our companies and systems against cyber attacks, and how to safely manage idled pipelines. As we move closer to the reauthorization of the National Pipeline Safety Program, our improved safety record is clear. Pipeline operators have learned the lessons of past pipeline incidents and are developing new technologies and innovative safety methods to prevent the incidents of the future. Pipeline operators have implemented past mandates from Congress, including notification of incidents within 1 hour of confirmed discovery, sharing safety data sheets in the early hours of an incident, and more frequent inspections of inland deepwater pipelines. Looking ahead, there's great potential to harness the safety benefits of new technologies and innovative methods for keeping pipes safe. As the PHMSA administrator said, we are on the verge of a pipeline safety technology renaissance. But a continuing challenge is to ensure that federal oversight of pipeline safety keeps pace with technology and innovation. Federal pipeline safety regulations developed 10 or 20 years ago sometimes do not reflect modern improvements to safety inspection technologies and capabilities. We look forward to working with the committee on these issues, and I'll be ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black, for your comments. Mr. Rourke, you may now proceed.
Good morning, Congressman Mitchell, Ranking Member Capuano, and members of the subcommittee. I am the Midstream Group Director at the American Petroleum Institute, where I oversee the organization's efforts to promote and ensure the safety of our nation's energy infrastructure, including pipelines, rail, and maritime assets. We appreciate the subcommittee's focus on promoting the safety of our nation's energy infrastructure and appreciate the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's efforts to continue to implement the Protecting Our Infrastructure of Pipelines and Enhancing Security Act of 2016. However, in doing so, it is important that it be done in a way that helps ensure that practical and performance-based safety regulations are instituted. The development of efficient and effective pipeline safety regulations ensures that we are taking proper actions to protect the public and the environment while at the same time continuing the U.S. energy renaissance that provides American consumers with access to affordable and reliable energy. Right now, the United States is leading the world in the production and refining of natural gas and oil and leading the world in the reduction of carbon emissions to their lowest levels in 25 years. Further, consumers are benefiting from our nation's energy dominance throughout the world with affordable American energy. Pipelines are critical to ensuring that consumers keep feeling the benefits of our nation's vast energy resources, and they are one of the most efficient ways to safely deliver the energy that Americans use every day, from the gasoline that fuels our transportation systems to the life-saving medical devices made from liquid petroleum products to the clean natural gas that is used to generate much of the electricity for our nation's homes, manufacturing plants, hospitals, and schools. It is estimated that increased investment in our nation's energy infrastructure, including pipelines, is a $1 trillion proposition that could support 1 million jobs per year through 2035 and add up to $100 billion to our GDP annually. At the direction of Congress, PHMSA has been working on the development of 2 significant pipeline safety regulations, one for oil and another for natural gas. Our industry has and will continue to proactively and collaboratively engage with the agency as they develop these rules to achieve our shared goal of ensuring the safe and efficient transportation of our oil and natural gas and their products. For example, for the safety of hazardous liquids transmission rule, we encourage PHMSA to consider our recommendations, including repair criteria and the ability to use engineering analysis in examining pipeline anomalies. For the safety of gas transmission and gathering pipelines rule, we appreciate and support the collaborative discussions through the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, or GPAC, to produce consensus recommendations for new regulations. We hope to see similar discussions through the GPAC for gathering pipelines, including the consideration of new API recommended practice on the subject. As an industry, we are committed to safety in all of our operations. API continues to develop and revise critical standards and recommended practices following the accreditation process of the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. Specifically, API has developed a number of standards to address pipeline safety in close coordination with subject matters from industry, government, academia, and the broader stakeholder community. In fact, PHMSA has incorporated by reference many of these standards in their regulations. As API standards are updated or new ones are developed to incorporate the latest advances and best practices in safety within our industry, PHMSA should execute a timely review to incorporate by reference the latest edition or the first edition of appropriate standards. Ensuring that pipeline operations can use the most recent and innovative technology will also help to bolster pipeline safety. Current regulations have no deadlines associated with PHMSA's review, notification, and issuance of special permits for new technology. This can result in inefficiencies and, more importantly, can prevent the industry from taking advantage of the latest safety equipment and practices. Operators are required to conduct timely assessments of pipeline integrity, and that may often be done more effectively with new technologies. However, there is a hesitation to do so, given at times the burdensome special permit process. Requiring PHMSA to exercise their authority to issue a special permit to review alternative safety technology permit applications within 90 days will also provide greater certainty in the special permit process, but it will also aid operators in utilizing the latest cutting-edge technologies to further pipeline safety. In fact, a more recent meeting of the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, members recommended including this concept in the proposed safety of gas transmission gathering lines rule, and PHMSA expressed agreement. Let me close by once more emphasizing that the oil and natural gas industry is committed to promoting safety in all of its operations, while it strives to ensure that American families and businesses can safely and efficiently access affordable and reliable energy. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke, for your comments. Mrs. Zamarin, if you'd like to begin, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Chad Zamarin, and I am Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategic Development at the Williams Companies. Williams owns and operates critical energy infrastructure, including our nation's largest natural gas pipeline system. We help to bring to market approximately 1/3 of the nation's natural gas that is used to heat our homes, cook our food, and increasingly generate electricity in an environmentally responsible manner. As mentioned by the chair, I am here today representing the Interstate Natural Gas Association's membership. I also serve on the Department of Transportation's Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, or GPAC, which Mr. Rourke mentioned. The GPAC serves as an advisory committee to DOT and to PHMSA regarding matters of pipeline safety and regulatory oversight, and is comprised of equal representation from the gas industry, government agencies, and members of the public. There are 4 principal points that I wish to make in this testimony on behalf of the natural gas infrastructure industry. First, operators will continue to incorporate new technologies and enhance safety practices even in the absence of new regulations or legislation. Our pipeline infrastructure represents what's great about our country and is a unique American advantage. Our pipeline network is the most vast and advanced in the world, with major portions built in times of greatest need when many said it couldn't be done. Pipelines built to fuel our industrial revolution, to avoid waterborne threats during times of great world wars, to fuel the growth and life quality of our great cities, and now to support the transition of our economy to cleaner fuels and renewable resources. In this spirit, in advance of PHMSA completing its pending rulemaking, INGA members committed voluntarily to undertake significant efforts to enhance pipeline safety. In one area alone, this work has supported an approximately 80% decrease in onshore gas transmission manufacturing-related incidents since 2010, which was the year that a manufacturing-related incident on a pipeline in San Bruno, California, spurred many of the mandates we are discussing today. Second, operators support sensible regulations and the completion of the pending rulemakings in a timely manner. It is critical for an industry of our national importance to have regulatory certainty to support ongoing investment and safety enhancement. PHMSA continues to work towards addressing pipeline safety mandates delivered in the last 2 reauthorizations, and we strongly support PHMSA completing its work in a timely and transparent manner. Implementing voluntary pipeline safety programs, as we've heard today, during the pendency of proposed regulations presents business risk. These pending regulations are meant to facilitate safety advances. However, if they take too long or aren't developed in a transparent manner, we risk the unintended consequence of delaying voluntary implementation of safety measures. Third, the GPAC, which we've mentioned before, it provides a process that has proven effective in facilitating broad stakeholder review of pending rules, and the GPAC should remain an active participant in PHMSA's work. Early last year, PHMSA initiated a series of GPAC meetings to consider the proposed natural gas transmission and gathering rule, one of the most ambitious and complex pipeline safety rules ever proposed. Several public meetings were held to review and advise on the rulemaking, and broad consensus was reached around many challenging topics. The GPAC's work, in collaboration with PHMSA and its staff, in my view, represents one of the most significant enhancements to pipeline safety since the original federal regulations were promulgated in 1970. Finally, there are several outdated regulations that do not reflect current leading practices and should be updated or eliminated. These outdated regulations result from a code of federal regulations that have been established over the past 50 years, one rulemaking at a time. As an example, PHMSA has announced its intent to consider whether integrity management programs offer an effective alternative to outdated class location requirements. Due to these outdated requirements, our industry spends between $200 and $300 million a year replacing perfectly good pipe segments. As another example, outdated inspection practices such as pressure testing and destructive material testing are required by code, yet can result in unnecessary outages and avoidable evacuation of methane to the atmosphere, while newer technologies can provide better safety practices and assurances without such negative effects. These are just a couple of the examples of the many practices that result from regulations issued as far back as 1970, with many based on technologies developed in the 1940s and 50s. We have learned a lot in the past 70 years, and there are much more productive ways to invest these substantial resources. In conclusion, the natural gas infrastructure industry fully supports the mission of PHMSA and its hardworking professionals. We will continue to be proactive in adopting advancements in technology and safety practices while supporting the implementation of new regulations in a timely and transparent manner. We urge the acceleration of new regulations through collaboration with the GPAC, alongside the rapid review and retirement of outdated regulations that serve as an anchor dragging behind an economic and safety enhancement engine ready to fire on all cylinders. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Zamarin, for your comments. Mr. Weimer, you may proceed.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak about pipeline safety today. Before I talk about the Pipes Act, let me give you a brief overview of where we stand today regarding the safety of pipelines in this country. Everyone testifying today supports the goal of zero incidents. Yet according to PHMSA data, since the President signed the Pipes Act 2 years ago, there have been 1,186 reportable pipeline incidents. Of those incidents, 544 were considered significant incidents under PHMSA's definition, and the number of significant incidents has been increasing over the past decade. Also of concern is that over 70% of the failures on gas transmission and hazardous liquid pipelines are from causes the operators ought to have control over, such as corrosion, incorrect operations, and problems with the materials and equipment they use. For the past 15 years, the emphasis in reducing pipeline incidents has been focused on integrity management programs in high-consequence areas. Unfortunately, significant incident rates within high-consequence areas also continue to climb for hazardous liquid and gas transmission pipelines. We have also included in our testimony today how the pipeline safety system that Congress has created also plays a part in PHMSA's inability to get things done. One barrier to getting to zero pipeline incidents is the cost versus benefit analysis that both Congress and various administrations have required new pipeline safety regulations to meet. With a large pipeline system where the probability of a failure is low but the consequences can be huge, it is nearly impossible to pass regulations that move us toward the goal of zero incidents under the current cost versus benefit rules. We hope you will make appropriate changes. Congress has also prioritized a system that uses industry-developed voluntary standards and recommended practices without at the same time creating a system to ensure broad participation in the development of those voluntary standards, or to even verify if companies are using those voluntary efforts or using them properly. We hope you will change this as well. We believe that PHMSA has met the regulatory reporting requirements in the PIPES Act, yet clearly what is shown by PHMSA does not portray the true tortured nature of some of these rulemaking efforts. For instance, the large rule meant to improve the safety of this country's hazardous liquid pipelines was started nearly 8 years ago, but that fact is not clear on the web page. What is also not mentioned is how many times the rule has bounced back and forth between PHMSA and OMB, and that even though the rule was ready for final publication, the current administration put a hold on it in January of last year for concerns yet to be stated publicly. We suggest, to get a better idea of where the delay in the rules is actually occurring, that PHMSA's rulemaking chart include the date the rulemaking was begun and for how long PHMSA, OST, and OMB each had the rule in their possession. In Sections 4 and 5 of the PIPES Act, Congress asked the GAO to produce important reports on the integrity management programs for both natural gas and hazardous liquid pipelines. The directive in the PIPES Act asks for these reports after the new gas and hazardous liquid rules are published. Since those rules have yet to be published, and the current integrity management rules have been in place for over a decade and are well understood, we ask that Congress direct GAO to produce these important reports as soon as possible instead of waiting for the proposed rules. In the PIPES Act, Congress mandated that PHMSA issue minimum federal safety standards for natural gas storage facilities within 2 years. There are still no final standards in place. PHMSA issued an interim final rule in December 2016. That interim rule essentially incorporated by reference 2 industry-developed recommended practices. Yet in January of 2017, a group of industry organizations filed a petition for reconsideration of the interim rule. PHMSA agreed to consider the petition and take further comments on the interim rule and hold off on any enforcement. No final rule or decision on the petition for reconsideration has yet been issued. In the PIPES Act, Congress also directed PHMSA to make it clear that the Great Lakes, coastal beaches, and marine coastal waters are considered unusually sensitive areas. This mandate is yet to be accomplished. The need to do this came as a surprise to us since clearly these areas are unusually sensitive. We were also surprised to learn that PHMSA does not currently have a way to define and map all such areas. Congress should direct PHMSA to show how all such unusually sensitive areas are being mapped and identified and set up a system so local and state governments that identify these areas in their jurisdictions all the time at least have an opportunity to review and comment on such PHMSA designations. I see my time is about up, so I just want to thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Weimer. As you are aware, votes have been called. We're going to put ourselves on the incentive system. If everyone keeps their questions and answers short, we can wrap this up before we go vote, and therefore we can adjourn the hearing. Otherwise, we're going to have to come back. I'm going to yield to my ranking member and not have any questions to move this forward. Sir?
Thank you, and I appreciate the panel, and we're trying to be respectful of your time as well. Just quickly, Mr. Zimmerman, as I understand it, you're the only one here who works for a private company. The others work for associations. As a member of private enterprise, if your bosses told you to do something and you didn't do it for 8 years, how long do you think you'd be employed?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I can't imagine long.
I didn't think so. Mr. Black and Mr. Rorick, you both work for associations. If your board told you to do something and you didn't do it for 8 years, how long do you think you'd be employed by the association?
It would be somebody else here.
Yes, I would have to agree with that.
That's what I thought. Because of timing, Mr. Weimer, I think you do a great job. Thank you for your support. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and I apologize for the shortness of this.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Ms. Esty for her questions. Thank you.
We appreciate you being here and would urge you to continue to, as we move forward with possible, as you heard, reauthorization of PHMSA, if it's really complying with what needs to happen. Just to flag concerns, I know I have some and a number of you have mentioned new technologies. We can't embed old rules that rely on less useful technologies. I've been working with other members of the committee on the corrosion issue. Obviously, there's huge opportunities for new sensors, for drones and other small robotics to make inspections more frequent, safer. So those of us both on this committee and Science Committee would be very interested in following up with you with some ideas on that front. The very fact that a number of these regulations have not been issued may allow us to potentially leap forward with better technologies. So I would ask for your help and support in thinking about that. And for all of you, I do think it's really important that we look at the culture issue, the safety culture that we need to have within those who are implementing rules. You can have the best rules on the book, but if they're not implemented well, if they're not incorporated into the culture, nothing's going to matter, and people will continue to lose their lives. So if you can follow back up with us, wanting to allow my colleagues to have a chance to ask their questions, but I'm quite interested in your thoughts on how we ensure that rather than adversarial attitude, that we actually are working hand in glove in a culture of safety that really is protecting workers and the public, so we can ensure safe delivery of energy for the American people. Thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you for your question and your brevity. Mr. Lipinski, you're recognized.
Thank you. We'll make sure we get this done quickly. So thank you all for your testimony, and thank the chairman. When we were considering the PIPES Act, I call attention to a number of reports from TSA, GAO, and CRS that identify pipelines as increasingly a target of attempted cyber attacks. So at that time, I had requested, along with Ranking Member DeFazio, that the GAO do a study of the adequacy of pipeline control system cybersecurity. GAO is in the process, I understand, of concluding this study right now. Earlier this month, 2 FERC commissioners published an editorial expressing their opinion that there should be mandatory cybersecurity for gas pipelines. I have more specific questions, but let me throw this out as a general question just so we can, I can submit the other questions for the record possibly, but I just want to ask Mr. Warwick if you think that there needs to be mandatory mandatory guidelines, regulatory mandates, or is the current creation of industry consensus standards and recommended practices, is that enough, do you believe?
Congressman Lipinski, there is an existing API recommended practice 1164 that deals specifically with the issues that you're talking about on SCADA systems and industrial control systems. That recommended practice is currently being updated. We've invited TSA to participate in it, so they're well aware of it. And in addition, that recommended practice also references the NIST framework, which is broadly used by not only our industry, but multiple industries. So we feel we're well aware of the threats. We're coordinating very closely with TSA, DOE, DHS, and the other intelligence agencies. And we feel that we are very engaged and on top of these issues, but there's always more to learn, sir, and we would welcome the opportunity to discuss it further.
Thank you. With that, just for time, I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I'm sorry that votes and other events today have abbreviated the time people may have had for questions. Your comments have been helpful to today's hearing. As there are no further questions, I would ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to the record. Unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or questions from members or witnesses will be included in today's record. Without objection, so ordered. I would like to thank our witnesses again. Thank you for being here and for your testimony. If no other members have anything to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned.